Serial science. 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 Serial science.
Good morning and welcome to Serial Science. It is bite-sized science for the curious. Every week we're hosting an Ask Me Anything with a scientist. So it is basically Saturday morning cartoons and cereal, only it's with science and it's on Wednesdays. So this week we have an ant expert. Aaron Fairweather is an ant expert and a PhD candidate at the University of Guelph. And they are here to talk to us about how ants have superpowers, all the wild and crazy things that ants do. So I am super, super excited to talk to Aaron today. Hey, Aaron.
Hey, how's it going?
Good. How are you?
Good, good.
So tell me, I have all of these favorite cereals of mine. What have you got for breakfast this morning?
All right, so this morning I have honeycombs. And it's actually apt for ants because ants are related to bees and wasps. Bees making the honeycombs. Ants don't make honeycombs, but they are in the same kind of general category of insects as them.
That's awesome. Oh, cool. So you are an ant expert, and so tell me what would a superpower of ants be? I feel like I know a few things. Like ants are, they're crazy good at teamwork. They build these huge nests. They can lift so much, but you obviously know way more about ants than me. So tell me, like, what would their superpower be?
So it's kind of hard to pick one because ants are pretty superpowered in a lot of different ways.
Okay.
Ants have super strength. This is kind of one of the ones that a lot of people know about, but ants can lift about 5 to 10 times their body weight. That's like an ant about this big being able to lift something this big.
Oh man.
Pretty impressive.
It'd be like me being able to lift like 500 pounds, like a tank truck or something like that.
Yeah, exactly. Like lifting up a car. It's kind of intense.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, and ants have pretty good communication skills, like you were saying. They have colonies of upwards of tens of thousands of individuals, and so they need to communicate with their sisters over and over and over again. And they do this with sounds sometimes. They make little sounds, screeching noises that each of them can interpret and talk about. But the main way that they communicate is with pheromones, which are these microscopic chemicals that we can't see or smell, but they can detect. And they lay these down and ants travel along them. And so if some ant finds a food source, say a kilometer away, they leave a pheromone trail to it. And then other ants can follow that same pheromone trail to get to the same food source.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
Can do only the ants that they want to come to that food source, can they read the pheromone trail, or does every ant just join in on the party?
So the pheromones are typically pretty ant specific. So within a species, they will be able to detect their own species pheromone trail. That depends though. There are some species that can detect other ant species pheromones, but those are typically spies, or they're slave makers. They're these social parasite kind of ants.
There are social parasite ants? There are bad ants. There are evil villain ants in the ant world, is what you're saying?
Yeah, pretty much.
Oh, okay. Tell me about this.
So there are 4 different kinds of social parasitism within ants. There are social parasites that just invade a colony and then they live amongst them. So they mimic the pheromones that other ants use, and then they just live in the same colony, and the host ant will tend to feed them and they'll take care of them because they think they're their own sisters and their own queen, but they're actually a different species.
Oh my God.
So they kind of live in a little bit of a mutualism. They're not threatening each other, and they live in stability with one another.
They've just infiltrated.
Yeah, they've just infiltrated. There are social parasite species that invade and then kill the host queen, and then that queen becomes the new queen, one of the evil ants.
Yep, definitely.
And so the host ant will start to take care of that queen, and slowly the parasite queen will take over the colony. So she'll become the new colony. That will be the new nest. They've killed off the original colony without the original colony even knowing, which is kind
of just like a coup, a silent takeover.
Yeah, exactly.
Wow.
Probably the most scary version of the slave-making ants, the social parasites, is the slave makers. So these are ants that actively go out and raid other ant colonies, and they, when this raid, they'll kill off the host queen and then enslave the host workers.
Oh my, wow. How do they how do ants do that? How do they just waltz up and be what would they make the slave ants do? What functions are they wanting to outsource to these new slave ants?
Yeah, so it's kind of funny. The slave making species has evolved to a point where they can't take care of themselves. They need the host species in order to forage for food and to look after them. So the parasite slave maker species will establish a colony, but they don't have enough food to sustain themselves. So they'll go out, actively find the host colony of ants, and they do this via the pheromones that we were just talking about.
Right, leaving that trail.
Yeah, exactly. They follow that trail back to the host colony. They kill off that queen, and then they grab the workers and they grab the babies of the host ant and they bring them back to their colony. And then they smell very similar to the host colony. So the host ant, the enslaved ones, kind of get duped. They're like, okay, this is my new home now, and I'm okay with this. So they start to go out and forage and find food for the slave maker.
So there's a certain level of trickery going on with the pheromones and the scents and the okay.
It's pretty conniving. Their ants are a complicated set of organisms.
So we have a question. Are ants territorial?
Ants are very territorial.
Okay.
So along the same lines as the slave makers, where we have competition between those species in that case, there are also interspecies competitions. So within the same species, you have colonies that will butt heads against one another, and they'll start to fight one another. And I actually have a good video of this, if you don't mind me sharing.
Yeah, for sure. So these are two different species of ants that are competing?
So
these are the same species.
Exactly. These are the two same species of ants, and the colonies have just kind of connected with one another, and they don't like that. So they've poured onto the sidewalk and they're fighting one another. So I'll bring that up now.
So this is sort of a battle this is a turf gang war is what we're looking at between neighboring ants that have gotten a little too close to each other. So we're going to see what that looks like. Oh, I feel like I have seen this.
Yeah. So that's my hand right there.
And I always thought...
Yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead. I always thought that this is when ants find like a breadcrumb or something like this, when they kind of swarm like that.
No, so it's kind of funny. Like these ants in this case, they're two different colonies of the same species. They have connected their colonies underground, and because they are very territorial, they don't like this. And so they pour out onto the sidewalk. And one of two things can happen in this case. The ants either talk it out, so they tap antennae against one another, and they're like,
they negotiate?
Yeah, they negotiate, exactly. And so they're like, okay, I don't want either of us to end up dead, so we'll just part our ways, and I'll take this area, you take that area, we're okay.
For sure.
Or if they're not okay with that, then they'll start to battle with one another. And at the end of all of this, you'll end up seeing heads of ants on the sidewalk. They will literally decapitate each other. And whatever the victor is, the queen ends up being victorious. The enemy queen dies, and then they get the whole territory.
Okay, so I have a very related question coming in from the chat about ant gang wars. So we talked about their super strength, and we have a question. Do the ants' extreme strength come into play when they have these sort of ant battles, these combats, or are they all equally strong? So it's like very much a battle between equals.
It's kind of give and take with that. There is equal footing in some ways. They do have the same kind of strength. So if they're locked with mandibles with each other, there's kind of a pulling action going on. They're evenly matched, and so nothing's going to happen. But if an ant happens to get attached to a weak point of the enemy, the opponent ant, they'll just break them really quickly because they're that strong. So these ant wars can happen pretty quickly. Like the one that I saw there on that video that I shared, that happened over the course of like 40 minutes. And that was about 10,000 ants. And at the end of that, they had finished. They were done. So it's not like a human war where this can go on for years and years. With ants, it goes very quickly. Like once one colony has fought another one, they can break it off.
Okay, so it starts quickly and then it finishes quickly.
Yeah.
We have some questions about red ants specifically. Okay. So are red ants are they a species of ant that takes other ants as slaves? Are red ants are villain ants here? Okay, they are.
Yeah, so the red ants, there's quite a few different species of them in general.
Okay.
You get these red and black ants, and I think that's the one that most people end up seeing. And these red and black ants tend to be slave makers. So they'll be the ones that actually invade the full black ants that you see on lawns and that kind of thing. So they are pretty common, and they're a slave maker species.
Okay.
But the full red ants, it depends. The full red ants that a lot of people think of are the fire ants, the European or the South American fire ant. They aren't slave makers, but they are highly aggressive. So they will take over territory of other ants, and they'll battle with other ants in this kind of war fashion.
That's great that you mentioned that, because we did have some questions about fire ants. What makes fire ants different, and do they have anything to do with fire, or is it just their fiery personalities?
So their namesake is for a couple of reasons. One, they are stingers. So they're an ant that actually stings, and that sting kind of burns like fire when you get stung by it. It's not very fun.
Human nickname.
Yeah, exactly. But also there's another reason that I think is really cool is when they go out and they raid the surface of the soil, there's so many ants and they're walking on the leaf litter, they almost sound like crackling fire. It's really cool. Yeah.
It's really cool. That would have to be like maybe not millions, but that is a lot of ants.
That's a lot of ants, and that's a lot of legs.
Oh yes, definitely.
Yeah.
Cool. So we started off talking about honeycomb cereal, and we have a question about what other kinds of insects live in a colony structure.
Sure. Yeah, so there are a few different other insects that live in colonies. There are bees, and we've talked about that. So like the honeybees and the bumblebees, they live in colonies.
For sure.
There's a lot of wasp species, wasps that make paper nests often. There's wasps that
Oh,
dig.
yeah.
They all live in colonies as well.
Mhm.
There's also termites, and termites are kind of
Yeah.
a weird exception as they're not related to bees and wasps and ants. They're very different, but they're more related to like cockroaches, and they live in
Okay.
colonies as well. And the
Oh,
neat thing
interesting.
about uh, the termites compared to ants is ants have a queen, whereas termites have a queen and a king.
Interesting.
Yeah.
The dual monarch.
Yeah.
Um, we have another question going back to red ants
Sure.
and where they live, and just wanting to know, why do red ants seem to live on the outside of their nest? You see them on the move a lot. It seems like they don't spend too.
Oh, sorry. I think the video cut out a little bit.
Oh, so the question was, why do red ants seem to live on the outside of their nest?
Okay. So that's kind of relates to the aggression and the slave making behavior. If it is a slave making ant, they typically live on the outside because they're always raiding other colonies. They always got to find new
For
hosts
sure.
to take after them, look after them.
So they're just on the move,
Yeah,
scouting. For
exactly.
sure.
Other red ants, like the fire ants, they'll be on the outside of the colony more than on the inside because they're also more aggressive. And so they're protecting their colony and also going out and making sure their territory is well established.
Oh, okay, for sure. So they have a lot of just duties outside the home. They're on the move a lot.
Yeah, exactly.
Cool. So we've yeah, ants are pretty cool. They do some crazy things that definitely humans could not.
Yeah.
And there are, like, how many types of ants are there? We've talked about quite a few already, but like
Yeah.
it's a pretty broad category. How many kinds of ants are there?
Worldwide, there's over 4,000 different species of ants.
1,000.
Yeah. And in Canada, there's probably around 200. So we have a good diversity of ants around us, and we've already talked about, they occupy a whole bunch of different niches. They're very diverse. They have these social parasites. They're just found in every environment you can imagine. Yeah, they're pretty ubiquitous. They actually outweigh human biomass on the planet 4-1. So there's a lot of ants.
That is a crazy amount of ants. So there's 4,000 species of ants. They're everywhere, and obviously lots in Canada.
Yeah.
What do they do in the winter time? Like, are they hibernating? Are they just in an egg format? Like, what I've never seen an ant in the winter time. So tell me
Yeah.
a bit about that.
There's a few different ways that they overwinter. One of the ways is that they ball up around the queen. All the workers ball up around the queen, and they kind of are an insulation to make sure that the queen doesn't get too cold or freeze. And so they are kind of moving a little bit all the time to make sure that the middle of that ball is pretty warm. That's one of the ways. And they'll usually just stick inside their colony in that case. And so you never see them.
Okay. So
Another way, sorry, go ahead.
They're just tucked away for the winter.
Yeah, exactly. Another way is that the queens actually have another superpower, which is an antifreeze sugar. So
tell me about this natural antifreeze.
Yeah. It's like the antifreeze that you would use in your car to make sure that the pipes don't freeze. It's a compound.
Okay, the blue stuff. Yep.
Yeah, it's a compound that has a very low freezing point. So it would need to be way, way colder than it ever gets within our winters.
Okay.
And so the queen in that case just goes very dormant. She goes very slow and quiet throughout the winter, and she'll stay within her colony, but makes sure that all of her cells are coated with this antifreeze protein and has a lot of it inside of it. So the cells never actually freeze, the damage is never done, and so they can live into the next season.
Okay.
Yeah.
So basically like Captain America kind of being frozen in time for decades. Okay, that is super cool.
Yeah, exactly.
So we have some questions about the About the stingers. So,
Sure.
I'm sure most people have been bitten by an ant at one point. How do they sting? Is it like a bee,
Yeah.
a stinger?
So it's pretty cool. Ants have a whole bunch of different means of kind of warding off predators. They bite and they sting, and they also have something called an acidifer, which is something different. In the case of the stinger, it's very similar to a bee, and the venom that they use is the same as a bee. So if you are allergic to a bee sting, you'll be allergic to an ant sting at the same time.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's good to know.
But there are groups that have no longer a stinger, and it's this little hole on one side of their abdomen, and they use it to spray formic acid. Yeah, it's pretty
This sounds
crazy.
like another superpower.
Yeah,
Ep.1.
spray acid.
Just,
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So that sounds worse than a stinger, actually.
Yeah, I have an image that I can showcasing the different kinds of forms that ants have.
Yeah, for sure. I feel like I've only ever seen them scurrying around on the sidewalk, and they're pretty teeny. So.
Yep, there we go. So these are the 3 different kinds of ants that you'll typically have. This on the one side is the acidifer. So it's a little hole with hairs on the side, and it helps to spray out that formic acid. Underneath that, we have an ant that doesn't have anything. And so they typically rely on numbers and mandible strength to ward off predators. And then at the bottom, we have a stinger. And so that's typically what you would see in a bee or a hornet. It's very much the same thing.
Cool. Wow. Yeah. I feel like I'd rather get bit by an ant than have acid sprayed on me. But maybe it's a very small amount of acid. I don't know.
Yeah. So if you've ever picked up one of the red or black ants, they tend to have this very acrid smell to them. You can smell your fingers and it smells very strong and pungent. That's the formic acid that they're spraying on you.
Crazy.
Yeah.
Wow. So there are a huge number of species of ants. They're everywhere. They outweigh humans by a great deal. What do ants contribute to their environment, to our environment that we share?
There's a whole bunch of things. There's a long list. Ants are pretty incredible in a lot of different ways.
For sure.
So one of the ways is that they are predators. So they feed on a lot of pest species that we don't like on things like our crops. Things like caterpillars, cucumber beetles, potato beetles, they feed on a lot of those kind of things. A lot of the species do.
So ants are good for your garden. They're good for your farm.
Yeah. And in more ways than one, they also tend to aerate the soil. So as they make their tunnels, that helps to bring air down into the ground. And it might surprise you, but plants even need a little bit of air to breathe as well. And so their roots need a little bit of that oxygen flow into the ground. They also cycle nutrients. So when they feed on things on the surface, they'll bring them into their nests. And sometimes they let them decompose and grow as fungi and stuff like that. And that helps to bring nutrients and things like nitrogen into the soil, which is also good for your gardens. There are some really what we call keystone species of ants. So these are ants that are particularly important to certain ecosystems. One of these ants is Aphenogaster picea. It's this really small forest ant, and they have a habit of collecting seeds of herbs and trees on the surface of the soil, and they'll bring them into their nests and plant them. So after... Yeah, exactly. And so after a forest has damage, whether it's like fire or windfall or clear cutting from humans even, if you have this ant present, the forest can grow up to 2 times faster with it present than with it absent.
That's amazing because it's been sort of preceded. It's ready to go.
Yeah, exactly.
That is actually really incredible.
Yeah.
We have a question. I've never heard of this. It sounds terrifying. What is an exploding ant? Are there exploding ants?
This is good. This is good.
This is a real thing.
Yeah, this is a real thing.
Terrifying.
So there is a species of carpenter ant, Camponotus, from the tropics. I believe it's from Madagascar, that have this internal organ within them that's filled with this really sticky substance. And if there are threats to their colony, what they'll do is they put a high amount of pressure on that organ, and they cause it to rupture and explode.
You're saying the ant has like a pipe bomb in its belly.
Yeah. I'm so glad somebody like knew that and brought that into the chat. That's really cool. Yeah.
That is totally, totally unexpected. That is amazing and terrifying.
So I don't have a video of that, but you can find it on YouTube if you just search like exploding ants. There's some great footage of it, that you can see, and it's like it's incredible.
Wow, they have a lot of ways to defend themselves.
Yep.
We have a question about can ants swim?
Yeah. So ants have a few different means of kind of swimming. Small ants tend to not break the surface tension of water. So they can actually run on the surface. Yeah, they float and run on the surface of the water.
They can walk on water, is what you're saying.
Another superpower.
I think we're at like 11 or 12 superpowers at this point.
Yeah, exactly. So small ants, they can do that. Another thing that some ants will do is a thing called rafting. So this is particularly common within the South American fire ant. After a flooding event, they'll group up as a colony on the surface of the soil, and they'll kind of move in a, what would you call it? Like a conveyor belt action over the surface of the water, and they'll move along the surface of the water as like a mass. And the queen will be resting on top like her throne, and like will be kept dry the whole time.
It's like this rotating flotilla of ants.
Yeah.
That's amazing. Speaking of the queen, we do have a question. What is the average lifespan of the queen? And if she dies, does that mean that the colony always ends?
So that's, again, a multifaceted question with a lot of different ways that ants have kind of adapted to this. So there are ants that will die after 1 year. They only have like one annual cycle, and then they'll have queens that will overwinter in the next year from like the offspring of that generation. There are queens that live a very long time. I think the longest lived queen on record is 67 years old. Yeah.
There is an ant that is older than my grandmother.
Yeah.
That is, whoa. Where was this?
So this one was a tropical ant from Australia, I believe. I believe it was the dinosaur ant, but I'm not quite sure. It would be
Australia.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So there are queens that will live a long period of time. I have one species of ant that I keep quite regularly, and I'm using it for my lab work. And it will live about 20 to 30 years too. So long-lived ants are pretty common. As to the question about whether the queen dies, the whole colony dies, there are some ants that don't have just one queen per colony. They're called polygynous colonies, or have multiple queens.
Sure.
And so if one of those queens die, then the colony can keep going. And often they will recruit new queens from subsequent nuptial flights. And so nuptial flights are the time of the year where ant queens to be and males will go fly out. They'll mate with other queens and males from other colonies, and they'll establish their own nests. Sometimes in polygynous colonies, they'll have queens come to them and live amongst an existing colony.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it just kind of passes over to the next queen.
Yeah, exactly.
Cool. Awesome. Well, we have just a few minutes left. What is the craziest thing you can tell us about ants that we haven't already? We've talked about so many crazy things about ants already, but are there any other gems you want to leave us with, or videos or photos or anything like that?
Sure. So I think one of my favorite ants, and it's related to one of my favorite books, Dracula. It's called the Dracula Ant, and it feeds on the hemolymph, or the blood, of its babies.
So there, you might need to say that one again. There is a blood-sucking ant.
Yeah. That feeds on the blood of its babies.
Of its babies. Oh my God, this is definitely going in the ranks of the evil supervillain ants. So why would they do that? That sounds that sounds sort of like not great for the perpetuation of the species kind of thing.
So the workers will actually go out and they'll forage for food, but they don't eat the food. They feed it to their babies. And then
Okay.
when their babies get big enough, they'll puncture a little hole in the side of the offspring and they'll eat the juices out of the baby. And
Cereal's so much better.
yeah, cereal's so much better. And then they'll seal it back up. So the baby doesn't actually end up dying.
Okay.
They'll repair the baby after they've done the damage.
So they feed their babies and then they don't the babies just kind of process the food for them, like they digest it.
Yeah,
Kind of
exactly.
like the opposite of birds, where the mama bird will digest it and then
feed them. Yeah, it's the babies that are feeding the adults.
yeah. Very
yeah, without their consent.
amazing. Awesome. Well, yeah, thank you so much for joining us.
No problem.
This has been really fun. And yeah, I think ants are definitely my new favorite insect, although I am a little bit terrified of them. I respect them and respect them deeply. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Aaron. It was fabulous to have you on board for our Wednesday morning bite-sized cereal science. So next week, same time, same place on the internet, we're going to talk to a textile scientist. So we're going to talk about superhero costumes and capes and Kevlar and crazy materials and some of the stuff that we have. So awesome. Thank you so much, everyone. Thanks for joining us. And yeah, we'll tune in next week.